What kind of person does God use? The Bible surprises us here. God used Moses, who had a speech impediment. God used David, who was morally impure. God used Saul of Tarsus, who persecuted the church. Let us this morning look at a well-known Old Testament character that God used, Jacob. The personality of Jacob is clearly seen when we recall how he deceived his father Isaac in order to steal the birthright blessing of his brother Esau. We see his personality at work again when he went to live with his uncle Laban. Jacob made a deal with his uncle Laban that he would keep all the dark-colored sheep and the spotted goat. Laban would keep the rest. That seemed like a fair enough agreement. But Jacob devised a plan for breeding the sheep and the goats so that the number of colored sheep and spotted goats greatly increased while the other decreased. You can read of this in Genesis chapter 30. Years later, when Jacob left, he had almost all the sheep and all the goats. Jacob was what we would call a mover, a shaker, a wheeler, and a dealer, a scoundrel. Yet he was a person whom God used in his redemptive plan. It is worth noting that his name was also Israel, the name by which the people of God was called. The sons of Jacob formed the nucleus of the tribal alliance into which the nation of Israel was later formed. How can God use a person with a personality like Jacob? God uses all kinds of people. Let us think for a moment of the different personality God used in the Bible. God used the brashness and the boldness of Jacob. In the New Testament, God used the quiet behind the scene Andrew, the aggressive approach of Simon Peter. There was Barnabas, the encourager. On the other hand, Paul, the zealot. On the other, during the medieval Reformation, God used monks who cultivated their garden and prayed in secret, as well as the famous Martin Luther, who stood up and changed the world. Since God uses all kinds of people, we can rest assured that God is able to use each of us. Let us, as God's people, dare to be bold today. That is, to live lives of faith, being the person God intended us to be. Let us not delete or blot out our uniqueness in order to become the way others think we should be. God did not change the personality of Jacob in order to use him. God redirected him so they become a source of blessing and not a source of trouble. He used Jacob's boldness for his kingdom gain. God can and will use us. God uses determined people. Jacob was a determined person. He refused to give up. His determination is clearly seen in his passionate pursuit of Rachel, the daughter of Laban. Jacob loved her at first sight. her father Laban required of Jacob 7 years of labor for her hand in marriage. The time passed by quickly, for it seems like only a few days because of his love for her. On the day of the wedding, Jacob thought he had married Rachel, but discovered that he had been tricked by Laban and was married to Rachel's older sister, Leah. Later, Laban explained to Jacob the custom. The older daughter had to be married first. Laban informed Jacob that he could still marry Rachel, but in order to have her hand in marriage, he would have to work another 7 years. The average Trini man, as we would say, would have bossed it by now. Being the determined person Jacob was, and having the love he had for Rachel, he agreed to Laban's request. When you add it up, he labored 14 years to earn the right to marry the woman he loved. 7, and he was tricked into marriage with Leah. And 7 more for Rachel, the love of his life. That is tenacity. That is courage. That by no doubt is determination. One of the greatest problems we as Christians have is our lack of determination. We tend to give up soon. Marriage ends too early. Parents quit on their role when the going gets tough. Church members jump from one congregation to another. Ministers become discouraged and move to another place of ministry. In each case, it can be argued that in giving up too soon, we end God's chance to work in and through us. Wilma Rudolph, the fastest woman in the world, U.S. Olympic champion, had to overcome polio, pneumonia, scarlet fever, braces, and poverty. She could have given up at any time, but she kept pushing forward. God uses people who simply refuse to give up. Sisters and brothers, how committed are you to a task? Do you keep at it until it is completed, or do you give up when the going gets tough? God uses teachable people. The man Jacob was a work in progress. The characteristics displayed in Jacob's earlier life is not the characteristics that we see in him in his later life. In his youth, he gave in to the quest for instant gratification. In his younger years, he didn't care about his brother. Later, he bowed 7 times to express his honest and humble desire to be reunited with him. Earlier, he didn't care about God. Later, he held on to God's angel and declared that he would not let go until God blessed him. He was a man who grew as he learned the greater lessons of life. Jacob was a teachable character. God uses teachable people. What we know is not important, but what we are willing to learn is essential. What we are willing to become in the hands of God is important. What kind of people does God use? God used a man who had a speech impediment to negotiate the freedom of Israel from the Pharaoh of Egypt. A boy with a sling and shot against a giant. David became the greatest king to rule Israel. A man to build a church who wanted to destroy the church. Saul, who became Paul, the greatest apostle and evangelist. God used a scoundrel who became the namesake of his people, Jacob, Israel. And God can use you and me. Odd choices for sure, but God can use us. God uses all kinds of people. He uses determined and persistent persons. He uses persons who are willing to learn. My sisters and brothers, hear God calling you today. Do not sit still. Respond. Here am I. Use me, Lord.